Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for that. And cheers, Arnie, for a really great talk and a great set of talks the other day as well. So cheers for Ukie for arranging this, even if it's not quite as...
Your room presenter views just popped up on screen there, so we can see
that as well. Yeah, that'll be good. So thanks everyone. Great set of talks, and hopefully I can do something that lives up to that current momentum. As Leon said, I'm Michael Williams and I'm head of product at Intorqa. A bit of background on us. Intorqa are the first community intelligence company, and we're focused on risk in the gaming industry. What does that mean? I'll get onto that later, but we're all players, and many of us have worked on game development, and we've also seen personally how cheating continues to be a problem across the industry. So what we set out to do was to build a platform, one that can give more insight into where, how, and why that's happening. And what I'd like to talk to you all today about is the technology that made that possible and what we've learned on the way. So we came together looking at game development as we kept having conversations which showed there was really quite an interesting problem at the intersection across brand and threat intelligence for games. And why is that? So I don't want to preach to the choir here, but gaming presents a really unique position. Not only does it have multiple satellite communities focused around a single specific game, but unlike pretty much anything else, they're communities where there can actually be a direct and harmful interaction between members. And then even more importantly, and very uniquely, there can be an interaction between those economies, and communities can manipulate that mechanism. So whether that's a cabal of players working together to distort the rankings, someone developing and selling an aimbot, or someone buying and selling Smurf accounts or boosting, maybe someone's paid to win in a game which just shouldn't have that mechanic. It's really problematic on an enjoyment level for players and an economic one for companies. So those actors are out there to manipulate. So recently GameStop was in the news. I'm sure no one's heard about it because it's not got much attention, but there was a similar problem there. A group of users banded together on a large scale caused massive disruption, putting it somewhat lightly, for financial firms. And the question has got to be, well, how are they not aware of that happening? And yet similar approaches have been part of multiplayer games ever since I can remember. They've been broken out across multiple games. There's multiple different economies there. So there's never the same type of attention or damage across the board, but it's taken a lot of work for internal teams diligently pushing back on that. So one of the first things we did when we moved into this space is we looked at the problem and wanted to get a sense of the scale there. And we were surprised. So if this was longer than a 15-minute talk, I'd ask everyone to take a guess of how many different channels we found offering to service the grey market behind gaming. So cheats, boosting services, currency resales, etc. I'll have to skip that Q&A session, but it was 2,000 different channels we found aiming to do that. And the visitors per month they got, based on our modeling, it's over 100 million users that are out there. And that's accounting for single users looking at multiple sites. So not people popping into a general forum or looking at Twitter. That's 100 million unique users per month who are going into communities and looking to break the fairness and safety of the games that we're all developing. And that's not too surprising when you think about it. That ability to set up new communities is fairly frictionless these days, and there's a global nature to games and an ingenuity of gamers who are fairly used to tribalism. But how much has that grown in the last 6 months? So we looked at that again, and some have been taken down by yourselves. There's been some very high profile takedowns recently, but that's still increased massively. So we've now found 2,200 channels, despite a lot of them being taken down. And the amount of unique users that are out there is over 120 million. So, and that's going to keep happening because there's an incentive there, whether it's monetary or mischief, people want to do this. So Edward Castronova said that our universes are unregulated playgrounds for economic organization. And it's the players that make them great, but the players that make them, the economics work as the way they are. And we owe it to the players to fully understand everyone involved, including those who don't really wish to play by the rules. So I saw a great talk last week from the UX team at Stadia, and they were stressing the importance of understanding each player to ensure we get positive interactions between all of them. But it's only by understanding what everyone's there for we can do that. Yet much of the personas that people have are hidden from in-game landscapes. So what we set out to do is to understand those threats, those communities, and look at how technology can allow us to spot them, understand them, and mitigate them. And that answer is analytics. Analytics can mean a wide array of different things to different departments. And there's a sample of really well-known approaches on screen from some fantastic pioneers in the field. And it's safe to say that, one way or another, it's a huge part of modern game development. That exercise in understanding your players' in-game actions, their habits, where they sit in your pipeline, it's really well understood at this point, and it continues to evolve. And that's essential information. The internal telemetry is undoubtedly fantastic and aided by a lot of the advances in the field. But there's a huge amount of interaction related to games that doesn't actually happen internal. And that external data can be a great foil and partner to it. And yet today, it's had a lot less attention on it. And so how do you know what's happened in the communities around your games today? And do you know if there's any risk there? So risk to your economy, to your player security, to the enjoyment of the business model. And how do you know what's happening right now? So not in-game chat, official Reddits or Discord servers where there's heavy moderation already, but what about everywhere else? So unofficial forums, chat groups, third-party marketplaces, blogs. And again, going back to that GameStop example, because it's so fresh in everyone's mind, there, organized individuals achieved an unexpected amount. And that same ingenuity has been a part of gaming communities for years. So did someone exploit the game mechanics? Did they put third-party software out there which breaks the balance of the game, or worked out how to take advantage of the game economy for their own gain? If someone's planning on doing it, how do you know? And how do you measure the potential ramifications? And you need to know that to understand how to shut down those exploits, to take proactive community and PR management, to bring in the right staff or teams at the right point, and to go after the developers and users appropriately. And some people have got teams who do this manually, others will have a homegrown solution, but they've always got to be very bespoke, because there's no other world like gaming, and therefore there are no other solutions which adequately account for the nuances there. But doing them prior to recent advances in innovation has meant they're either slow or limited in scope. And that's because to do it effectively, you've got to identify relevant content across thousands of communities. You've got to understand it. What does it mean from 100 different directions that you can take? You've got to measure the implication, you've got to report it. And some companies have tried using generalized services like brand monitoring, threat intelligence, or social media with little luck. Because the problem is they lack context of the games, their economies and their communities. They give you a fire hose of unrelated information, which just makes it impossible. So whenever we go into companies, the most common solution we see there is a paralegal, an intern, or just an unlucky developer who's sitting there picking through forums, which is a really slow and delayed approach. So where threats have become complex, rapidly evolving, the response has become full of noise, and that approach has got to evolve. So, we've just had a great talk from Arnie, and the process I've just described to you is one you should recognize from that talk just now. It's a data pipeline, a fairly common data analytics pipeline at that. So what we decided to do is treat it as such. And the great thing about this data is it's not tied to your platform. So you don't need to integrate anything or tie up your DevOps and LiveOps teams to get at those communities and the insights they can offer. It's just a data problem. So the first thing we need to do is pull that content down and store it and do so meaningfully. So advances in web technologies recently, and particularly databases, web technologies and databases like the ones listed here on the screen, mean we can use focused, trained, intelligent crawling to identify new sites that meet the criteria by threatening game companies. And we can keep them somewhere appropriate. So not fire hosing teams with every mention of a game, but actually honing in on what's most relevant. And we can store it and we can manipulate it appropriately without worrying about storage space, cost, or speed. And that's all thanks to cloud solutions. And those are considerations which would have been a blocker not so long ago, but have been freed up for everyone to take advantage of. And we've heard about this already, but doing it at speed and scale, these sites are growing and are going to continue to grow every month. The threats will continue to grow, and we can't wait a week to get content. If it's not close to real time, it's just not actionable. But the developments in scalable frameworks, actor-driven reactive streams, containerization, and the natural scalability of cloud solutions, all of those mean that we've moved into a position where this is actually viable now. Those architectures allow us to scale to a huge level, and we can be confident that more input means more insight rather than just operational risk or technical debt. And finally, we need to classify and understand the context for what we found. So humans can't look at every single item. Even focusing on the relevant ones means millions of items, which are just impossible to glean insight from. So we've got to take advantage of the huge strides made in natural language processing. Transformers recently have really changed the game, and using this every single step of the way. So not just at the end, but in the ingestion, in the scale, to understand the context behind each actor and each site, to understand whether they're a threat. And the volumes of data available, because this is all publicly generated, means if you've got the content set, supervised learning can really fly here. Now you can cluster it into communities with meaning. So are these people cheating at your game or selling cheats? Are they selling currency or items or cheats? Are they resellers or are they direct brands? And are they an experienced black hat who are looking at ways to really attack your system? Or are they just a player probing to see what has been done in the past? And are they even a player? They might not be, they might just be a prospect. So with the right data, we can connect actors, not just in terms of intent, but also ownership. Who's behind those top level domains? And we can use the technology available to measure and give insight with that information as quickly as possible. So the same framework that I've just mentioned that lets us understand that data allows us to run massive models against it to understand not just the importance of specific points, but also the covariance and the correlation between those different communities and their actions. But above all, as much as I've spoken about technology here, we do still need domain knowledge. So we can build on the wonderful APIs that are made by the community, and we can get huge improvements there when it comes to training sets and understanding. But if we use appropriate and accurate research, we can push that even further. And working with the teams who truly understand the problem space, so you guys, the developers and player support who are living in these worlds every day, we can understand the game, which is as important as understanding the messages out there. And they really allow us to answer questions like these. So in what will hopefully be a surprise to no one, particularly given the earlier screens, we've done a lot of this, and we've done it for almost every game we've identified. So I just want to walk through just very quickly some of the assumptions we made that turned out to be wrong and things that surprised us. So the first thing we came into this expecting is that we thought the really bad actors in here would be hidden. They'd be hard to get to and very secretive, but nope, we were very wrong. So we do monitor the dark web, but it's a fraction of the world. It's mostly surface web and closed channels. And why is that? Well, brand. So brand is hugely important to these companies. And as the brand is pushed, the company grows and so does its legitimate footprint. And you can see here that high profile advertisements, but we can actually find registered company details for most of these vendors. And those we can't, the users are still very trackable, both across sites and even into games. And we can use that to build community clusters. We also thought, cheaters are evil. We've all been on the end of a bad aimbot, and they just must be motivated by spite. But actually, if you look at the branding of some of these, and there's a couple on screen here, they're not pushing an agenda of poning noobs. Most of the advertising is about leveling the playing field. So that suggests the cheaters at least believe that they're not doing this to be mean. And the teams behind the cheats know their audience. So these are actual adverts, and it's really interesting from a brand and product perspective as they're talking to some of the problems the demographics might have. And given the pricing of these cheats, they're an affluent demographic to understand. And if you then look at the cheaters talking about their motivation on forums and chat groups, they're clearly using it as an alternative to in-app payments, either due to cost or availability. I believe they're competing against other people with the same advantages. We also thought this would be small businesses, small sites. We've already discussed the breadth of it, but the cost is insane. And we've found the average cost of cheats is $40 a month. And items going for sale for 10 times the in-game cost, and accounts which may never reach the payee going for thousands. We also thought it was just a problem for big companies, but with the right data pipeline, actually you can know as soon as you've got exposure. And here's an example of a smaller game that we've tracked. And these aren't cheat communities, these are unofficial, so unmoderated forums where we've picked up players talking about cheating being a problem. And you can see where players really start to lament the unfairness of the game. And it's adjusted for seasonality, so we're not just looking at the popularity here. And then you can look at chatter from cheat communities about cheating on the game and see there's some leading indicators there. And shortly after the cheat community gets interested in the game, the problems arise. And then you can see, well, when was the first cheat announced? So the damage is done earlier than expected. And even if at the point cheats being discussed doesn't equate to a cheating problem with an impact on active players, that reputation itself can drive further fears. So by understanding what's going on in the communities you can't see, you can understand what's coming to your player-facing teams in the ones you are responsible for. And it's really new technology that's allowed that to be possible. So certainly Intorqa wants to give you that information if you're not interested in doing it yourself. And if you are, we're very interested in talking through some of the problems that we faced and the ecosystem as a whole. So yeah, thank you very much. That's time for me. It was slightly over, so apologies. Yeah, please drop me a line if you're interested in chatting further.